I'll take what is ABS for $500, Alex. This video covers a standalone ABS swap in my 3rd gen Camaro, but also applies to any other car. I can't tell you how much I'm enjoying this ABS on my Camaro. There's zero hassle when braking and turning, and my favorite part? No flat spotting tires. These 315 Yokohama AO52s have at least 3 flat spots on every tire. And every flat spot is where the tires end up cording. And it hurts to flat spot a tire this expensive. But now, that's a thing of the past. Okay, so what is this ABS? Well, it's a Mark 60. It is the ABS unit out of a 2005 or 2006 BMW E46. My unit being the M3 unit. So why this ABS? Well, it's unique because it's completely standalone. It works with pretty much anything that has 4 wheels, and it just so happens to be an extremely good unit. The Mark 60 E1 uses internal pressure sensors and normal tone wheels. The Mark 60 E5, found on E90 and E92 BMWs, use internal pressure sensors and the newer magnetic reluctor wheels. Obviously, these use different speed sensors. So the original Mark 60 uses tone wheels and 2 external pressure sensors. There are 3 different units that you're looking for. There's an 813, 817, and an 818. The 813 unit can be flashed with the BMW Motorsports tune. The 817 already has that race tune already in it, but these units are extremely rare. The 818 is the most common, but it can't be flashed. I have the 818 unit. And just a warning, this video is extremely long. For all the racers out there, the information in here is going to be very valuable. Okay, so let's start this expensive boondoggle. You need to find a place to mount the unit. This is rather hard since it's not easy to find a spot to put this unit. I ended up mounting my ABS unit on rubber bumpers and to an aluminum bar, then mounted it to my cut-up crash bar. The driver front is not an ideal location for this, but I could not find any other spots. If you notice that the rubber mounts allow the ABS unit to move around a little bit, this keeps vibrations from damaging the unit. Now to the wiring, the brutal part. A lot of wires, a lot of crimps. I made this wiring myself from scratch. You can buy full wiring kits for maybe less than $2,000. This is the basic ABS wiring on a 2005 through 2006 Mark 60 ABS from an E46 M3. The red lines are terminals that you can ignore. I used a plug kit from Thule Wire Works. You can also use the factory ABS plug pin if you want to go that way. I just wanted something a little bit cleaner. So I'll start with the 2 12-volt power wires. They use the larger crimps. I used 2 12-gauge wires for this, as they need to be able to hold 20 amps each. These crimp terminals actually work with a mixture of WeatherPack and MetriPack crimps, so I didn't have to buy any new crimps, even though these are European spec items. The wiring chart says that the 2 12-volt power wires are pin 1 and 32. The plastic Mark 60 plug has pinhole numbers cast into it that line up with pin 1 and obviously 32. With the 2 power wires done, I then made the 2 12-gauge ground wires. Notice here, the number is cast into the plug, and that will tell you where everything goes. And if you've ever watched any of my other wiring videos, I love to label everything, and this video is no exception. A label, some sleeving, and clear heat shrink goes on every single wire. In my case, the ground wires are very short. I mounted the 2 grounds to the crash bar since that is a chassis ground source. The 2 12-gauge power wires will go where the old C100 wires were alongside my driver inner fender. So after removing the unit, I'll crimp the 2 pressure sensor wires. Terminals 18 through 20 are for the rear pressure sensor, and 21 through 23 are for the front pressure sensor. Notice the small numbers next to 18, 19, and 20. These 1, 2, and 3 terminals correspond to the sensor plug. The 1, 2, and 3 are also cast into the plastic plug so you know which one is which. I'll count the holes, and the pressure sensor pins are right here. The rest of these pins use these tiny terminals. Normally you'd use a 20 or 22 gauge wire here. However, I had 1,000 feet of very, very expensive Waytech 18 gauge, so that's what I used. The small terminals use these tiny green weather seals. I used an H6 weather pack crimp die, and that seemed to work on these European connectors. I sleeved the 3 wires loosely and did a quick length fit check. Seems to work, although I could have made them a little bit longer. The sensor plugs use a different terminal that is provided in the wiring plug kit. And remember, the main wiring diagram shows the 1, 2, and 3 pin. These correspond to the marks on the plug. Make sure the pins are seated and locked in, then install the green plastic clip. The outer shell then slips on from behind. Dual wall heat shrink keeps the sleeving in place, and of course all my wires are labeled. And since I'm a paranoid guy, I resistance tested every single crimp that I did on this wiring just to make sure everything was crimped correctly. The sensor plug is pushed in. I then labeled each of the 3 wires with a colored mark to tell them apart, since all my wires are white. Make sure to reference the wire chart and make sure to check where each of the 3 sensor wires go. Some pinholes are unused. These blue plug seals seal them off. I then plugged in the wires into the main plug. Repeat this process on the other pressure sensor. Just to review, each of the 18, 19, and 20 pins corresponds with a pin on the main plug. Each pin has an asterisk that corresponds with a smaller plug. Alright, so now to pin number 9. This is for the fluid level switch. This sees ground when the sensor senses that the brake fluid reservoir is full. I don't have a fluid level sensor, so I just sent this pin to a chassis ground so the ABS unit will always think that the level is good. If you have something like a 4th gen master cylinder, you can wire up the low fluid switch to that. Pin 2 is the number 7 OBD2 port pin wire. I already had my wire lengths set up, so I went ahead and plugged it in. Now for the yaw sensor. This tells the ABS if you're pulling G-forces, and it also needs 4 wires. Pin 25, 29, 6, and 24. Looking at pin number 6, there's a 3 after the asterisk. That means that pin 3 on the yaw sensor plug corresponds with pin 6 on the ABS unit. I have a bad habit of wiring from the destination first. I really need to stop doing that. The other various wires get plugged in, such as the speed sensor outputs. I won't cover everything in this video, otherwise the video would be 2 hours long. So the yaw sensor needs a home, ideally close to the center line of the car, in my case, under the center console. I drilled 2 holes and installed rib nuts with RTV on them to avoid leaks. I then used this aluminum plate and a few bolts and spacers to mount the yaw sensor. The sensor is mounted in this orientation. It looks upside down, but it's not. The tab faces up and the plug faces towards the front of the car. I made up the wires for the rest of this in various lengths. My 92 Camaro has a firewall plug called the C100. It's not used on my car because I have an LS1 swap with a standalone harness. So this is the perfect place to route the wires. I bought a new C100 plug kit off eBay, then printed up a blank C100 plug diagram. The main plug is unique in this way because it installs with a slider. These are my headlight wires. I installed big P-clamps to hold up all these wires. The unit is then bolted up. Do you remember when I said I needed to stop wiring from the destination first? Well, too late now. Anyways. The wires are run through the P-clamps, then cut to length. Some sleeving, heat shrink, and new terminal completes the steps. And of course, a label for everything. Pin 1 and 32 are the two 12-gauge wires that are the 12-volt positive source. The C100 has several big wires from the factory, so that works with this perfectly. I then wrote down what wire went where on this bulkhead. Yeah, I rewired my car from scratch and it got a little messy. It was my first time, but here's the disaster. Thankfully, it all works. Anyways, I already had two spare 30 amp relays already wired up to a switch. So I attached the two 12-gauge power wires to the M3 plugs and sent it to the C100 plug. And of course, wrote down every wire and where it went. So next is a 12 volt 5 amp wire for the ABS activation. This is typically powered on when the car is running. If you want to turn the ABS unit on and off, if you put a toggle switch on this wire, that'll get you what you want. But in my case, my car is powered off of a single switch. I simply attach this wire to a 12 volt source. Pin 8, 10, 12, and 14 are processed speed outputs, meaning in the future, I can attach an ECU that uses traction control or the like, and I can use the ABS wheel speed sensors as the data. I attach these wires to a DeechWorks plug for future projects. Hint, hint. I then pinned it into the C100 on the front and back. I purchased an OBD2 pin kit for like $10. The MK60 pin 2 goes to the pin 7 on the OBD2 port. So now on to the yaw sensor wiring. Pin 25, 29, 6, and 24 correspond with pins 1 through 4 on the yaw plug. The yaw plug is assembled and disassembled just like the pressure sensor plugs on the ABS unit. The yaw sensor wires are then installed on my firewall plug. The majority of the C100 bulkhead uses a common MetriPack 280. And again, label and record where everything goes. The yaw sensor is plugged in and the C100 pins installed. The rest of the rear speed sensors and brake pedal wires are plugged into the C100. This plastic retaining clip keeps all the pins in. So now for the rear speed sensors. I need a way to route them out of the car and to the axles. So I 3D printed a bulkhead for a Deechworks 12-pin flanged plug. I cut a hole in the rear for the bulkhead and then installed it just like my fuel pump bulkhead, which I do sell on my eBay store. It's a pretty easy install overall. The wires are fed through and the flange plug is screwed in. I peeled back the carpet and ran the 4 rear speed sensor wires underneath of it. I routed the wires through the center console and all the way to the C100 plug. So I ground this part off of the brake pedal switch pad a little while back. And surprise, surprise, I need to put the metal back. A few welds and a grinder, and it's all good again. This is for the ABS brake pedal switch. Pin 41 should be grounded when the brake pedal is pressed, and it should be an open circuit when the brake pedal is not pressed. I ended up using this painless brake switch. When the switch is pressed, it's an open circuit. When the switch is unpressed, the circuit is connected. So I had a spot open where my cruise control switch used to be, so the painless switch then takes its place. The OEM switch uses these weird clips, but this switch uses a nut instead. To make this work, one pin on the switch is connected to a chassis ground. In my case, this rather crowded ground screw. So pin 41 is grounded when the brake pedal is pressed. Now onto pin 44, the warning light for any ABS issues. I ordered this PCB from a guy online named Alex. This board simplified the ABS warning light since the Germans wired it up like weirdos. So it has 5 pins to solder. The ABS pin, which is pin 44, a chassis ground, 12-volt switched power, LED 12-volt power, and the LED ground. I started by soldering this ABS LED that I got off Amazon. Some solder flux and the wires solder up very easily. Then the next 3 wires are soldered in. The 18 gauge wire that I'm using is a little bit too big, so I had to thin it down a bit to fit the PCB. Not a big deal. This is the ABS LED part number. The light uses a 1/2 inch hole and it's a pretty good solution for this. The C100 plug is pinned up and bolted back in. The main ABS plug has this plastic pin as well. And now for the speed sensor plugs. They're crimped the same way as the other sensors. Push the plugs in. The plugs have numbers 1 through 3 molded into the plastic. These correspond with the ABS pins on the wire chart. Then this plastic piece clips on. The rear wires attach to my 12-pin flange plug in the rear of the car. Now for the big items, the ABS tone wheels. My 92 Camaro never had any, so I'm going to have to install 4 of them, and that's where the difficult part comes in. I used tone wheels from a 2014 Mustang, then had them machined to fit. These are 50-tooth tone wheels. The ABS unit doesn't really care about the tooth count as long as all 4 of the tone rings have the same tooth count. My billet hubs were machined to accept this ABS tone wheel. Thanks to Scott at BigBrakeUpgrade.com for doing this for me, for a mild fee. I used about a 3/1000th of an inch press fit. I froze my hubs in my freezer and then cooked my ABS rings in an oven. Green Loctite is applied and the ring is hammered on. nice and flat. My 3rd gen axles have no area for an ABS tone ring, so I ordered a custom set of 98 through 2002 Camaro axles from Mosier, then had Mosier cut them down to the shorter 3rd gen length. I had the Mustang tone wheels machined to accept a 0.02 of an inch interference fit. I don't have any shots of this, but a local axle shop pressed the rings on for me since I don't have any way to do it myself. Now the speed sensors. I used the rear Bosch E46 speed sensors on all 4 corners. Which speed sensor you choose is going to depend on what car and how much room you have. I ended up using this wacky aluminum mount attached to my brake caliper backing plate to mount the speed sensor. There are more than just E46 speed sensors that work with this MK60 ABS unit, but I'm not going to cover all that. That information is available online. I set the speed sensor gap to about 20 thousandths. That's about 0.5 millimeter. Less gap is generally better, so I didn't cover the rear speed sensors very much. What I ended up doing was drilling holes in my backing plates and then shoved the sensor in. This barely clears the drum parking brake shoes, but it did work. Also used the same 20 thousandths gap. It's pretty close, but it works. I bolted up the backing plates with some used aerospace grade bolts. The new axle is slipped in. A 20 thousandths inch gap is used, just like the front. The parking brake shoes are installed alongside the rotor. I took a carbide bit in a small router to clearance the axle flange face. This works stupid well to my surprise. Very, very nice finish. A quick shot of paint and that's it. So now for the rear brake lines. My single T-fitting is removed, so I can use these 2 Earl's fittings. This ABS is a 4-channel, so it requires 2 rear brake lines. This is how I added another brake line. I shoved another 3/16 stainless hard line under my custom fuel lines, wrapped in heat sleeving of course. I like AN line flares, so you'll see a lot of these on my car. I had a local hydraulic shop make me some 3AN PTFE soft lines for the rear brakes. You can also custom order PTFE lines from Pegasus Racing as well. My bulkhead gets plugged in. The rear speed sensor wires are plugged in and secured with zip ties. The front speed sensor plugs are plugged in. So I'm a weirdo, so I resistance tested every single wire that I made and crimped on this entire wiring harness. This was to make sure I had good connections and didn't mix up any wires. Pretty important that you don't mix up wires on this. As it turns out, I didn't make a single mistake. So since this unit is in German, I'll tell you which port is what. The front port that goes to the master cylinders is labeled V. The rear port for the master cylinders is labeled H. I went with two 4AN PTFE feed lines. These go from the master cylinders to the ABS unit. Since the OEM unit uses a 6mm line front and rear, I figured it was a good match to use the larger AN size. 4AN is extremely close to 6mm brake lines. So how much does it matter? Well, I'm not really sure, but I haven't damaged my balance bar and other people have, so maybe that's the difference. So that's two 4AN PTFE feed lines and four 3AN PTFE outlines that go to each corner of the car. This mess of an ABS unit is installed with my new PTFE lines. I can tell that this is going to be a pain to fix later on, but whatever. The grounds are then bolted up. If you noticed, I used a pair of small Deechworks plugs on the front speed sensors to aid in disassembly in the future. The grounds are good ohm-wise. My front brake ducts are reconnected. I powered up my car and checked the sensors with a Foxwell 510 Elite scanner. Spin the hubs by hand, and now I see speed outputs. Press the brake pedal, and I can hear the ABS unit ticking, so this is working. I pressure tested all my brake lines for leaks. Even shop air at 125 psi is a good way to check for leaks, as air has a smaller molecule size than brake fluid, so it's more likely to leak through small gaps. I did have one leak that needed one of these seal savers. Now to bleed the brakes. A motive power bleeder is used here. I made a dual bleeder cap later on to bleed the front and rear brakes at the same time for this balance bar setup. Now to use this Foxwell China Boy scanner. Select BMW, manual selection, 3 series, E46, M3 Coupe, USA left-hand drive. In my case, 2005. Then hit yes. Service. Chassis. Then ABS/dynamic stability control. I guess ventilation means bleeding if you translate German to Chinese, then to English again. Next up is to just follow the prompts. Each corner is done individually with the power bleeder attached. Some people have noted that they killed their Wilwood master cylinders with this bleeding procedure. I'm not sure how that happened to them, but just be careful. I ended up filtering all the new brake fluid over and over again as I kept bleeding it. Use soapy water to clean off any brake fluid. I installed my old tires and wheels and went out for a test drive, and this ABS works great. Now to racing. See here as I smash on the brakes and take a hard right under trail braking, and there's no fuss at all. The car doesn't care. No oversteer, just turns. Again here, 70 miles an hour to about 50, zero issues. If you notice here, there's new and old pavement on either side of my car. ABS doesn't care. Hard stop, zero issues. It's like cheating. This lap had a cone, but the raw time would have put me in 6th place out of about 103 people. And I have several SCCA national champions racing in this group, and they're pretty stupid fast. My stopping distance also improved from 141 feet to 120. 120 feet is much better, but there's still room for improvement. I hope you enjoyed this stupid long video. You'll have to bear with me because I'm running out of ideas, but I promise I'll try to get more content out. For now, make sure to subscribe, follow me on Instagram, support me on Patreon, yada yada yada.